World War I doesn't get a lot of press in the United States. We join late and barely get any soldiers involved before it's winding down, and we luckily get to be part of the peacemaking. But in Europe and throughout the rest of the world, World War I is a big deal. An entire generation of young men is almost wiped out. New technology literally industrializes the killing power of armies and turns war zones into hellish landscapes reminiscent of Dante's Inferno. Men come home shell-shocked. A euphemism for what we now know as PTSD, but they just attributed it to the effects of being shelled, waiting for bombs to drop on you while you sit in a ditch, wondering when you'll die. The peace, seen by the Western world as a reinvigoration of its values, actually signals the demise of the liberal Western order and paves the way for the rise of nationalist extremism. A podcaster I talk about often, Dan Carlin, calls his series on World War I Blueprint for Armageddon. And I think that captures just how devastating World War I was. It was apocalyptic in its scale. So how did it happen? How did European nations spend a summer trudging towards war basically willfully? What on earth was going on? I'll start by quoting Bismarck, the godfather of the Second Reich and architect of avoiding war with Britain through the Berlin Conference. Before leaving his office, he stated that a great European war was coming and that it would be, quote, some damned foolish thing in the Balkans that would start it. So what are the Balkans and why would a foolish thing happen there? The Balkan Peninsula connects Europe and Asia. It's where Greece is and where several countries who consider themselves to be inheritors of Slavic culture exist. For centuries, the Balkans were governed by the Ottomans, so large parts of the population converted to Islam, creating a diverse population linguistically, religiously, and ethnically, especially since it's such a crossroads between East and West. Because of the pretty mountainous terrain, many small local cultures developed, and while large parts of the population identified as Slavic, there was a lot of variety. So when these areas start to resist Ottoman rule, some do it on the basis of establishing a modern nation state, some do it on the basis of their Eastern Orthodox faith, and some do it for some combination of both. We're going to add into the mix that various European powers, namely Britain and France, and sure, why not Russia, have been eyeing the demise of the Ottoman Empire hungrily. After the Crimean War of 1854, they've tried to pry away pieces bit by bit, and an easy way to do that is to inspire, support, and fund the independence movements of these Balkan nations. This is a sticky spot of competition between the European powers, as you can imagine. And if you're the Ottoman Empire, you're not super pleased to catch hints of European vultures flying over parts of your empire. From October 1912 to July 1913, there had in fact already been skirmishes in the Balkans. And they're called the Balkan Wars even, trying to determine boundaries and borders and who was a part of whom. So the level of tension was high already leading into the year 1914. Leaving the Balkans for a minute, there had been tension brewing in Europe itself. Bismarck had foreseen that the competition over colonial territories could drive Europe towards war, and his brand new Germany really couldn't afford that. They needed time, and so he hoped the agreements he made at the Berlin Conference would postpone any inter-European wars while Germany became stronger. Well, at the close of the 1800s, Germany was strong. They were an industrial powerhouse to rival Great Britain, and building up their army and their navy to signal that. Great Britain watched from their islands with dismay. They were the naval power of Europe, and a powerful German navy could not be allowed. Furthermore, the new Kaiser, Wilhelm II, was skeptical of Bismarck's waiting game and anxious to prove Germany's might, right now. He dismissed Bismarck and pursued an aggressive militarization, which made their neighbor France super nervous. France's national pride was still smarting from when Prussia trounced them in a matter of weeks during the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, and they saw Germany's militarization in the beginning of the 20th century as a clear threat to their national security. A series of European alliances had been formed throughout the 19th century in the hopes of maintaining what everyone called the, quote, balance of power, making sure that there were counters to each nation's strength and possible goals in order to discourage a war. The two major ones that we're going to talk about are the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. The Triple Entente had its origins in two separate treaties. The first part of it was the Franco-Russian alliance. As Germany grew in power, France and Russia, who are on either side of Germany, were like, oh, we should probably do something about this. And so they joined an alliance to try and prevent Germany from trying anything fresh, since a war with one of them would now mean a war with both of them, and a war on two fronts is a bad time. Germany had actually prepared for this eventuality with something called the Schlieffen Plan, which called for them to knock out France quickly while it took months for the Russian behemoth to get moving. The Franco-Russian alliance became then the Triple Entente when the Anglo-French Entente Cordiale, which was an anti-German alliance, and the Anglo-Russian alliance all met and decided that by the transitive property they were basically all three allies. It was not, however, in itself a defensive pact. Each one individually was, but together it was not. The opposite alliance, the Triple Alliance, was in fact a defensive alliance. The Triple Alliance was older than the Triple Entente and arose because Italy was so sad that France had beaten them in most of their North African ambitions. So Italy joined what already had been a pretty close relationship between Germany and Austria-Hungary. Germany and Austria-Hungary pledged to defend Italy in the event that France attacked, and Italy pledged to defend Germany against France and to remain neutral against Russia. All was conditional on staying out of each other's way in the Balkans. We're back to the Balkans. Italy wanted to expand into what is today Slovenia. Austria-Hungary wanted to gobble up Bosnia and eventually the Kingdom of Serbia. This was all a little awkward because Russia actually saw itself as the natural protector of all Slavic nations. Eastern Europe also contained a large population of Slavic language speakers, and so it fell to Russia, also Slavic, to defend the new nations coming out of the Balkans. And this brings us to an unpopular archduke in a foreign city getting assassinated. As we've discussed in previous episodes, multi-ethnic empires were actually falling out of favor and nation-states were rising in popularity. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was functioning as some kind of weird dual monarchy trying to give Hungary its due, was really trying to survive this wave of breaking away into nation-states and personal tragedies of the royal family. The heir, a popular and liberal reformer named Crown Prince Rudolf, had committed suicide with his mistress when they were unable to wed, and the empress, the wildly popular Empress Sisi, had been assassinated by an extremist at a train station because he had really just wanted to assassinate any royal, and she was the one he ended up finding. That left the heir to be Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who had planned his whole life to live as a royal without ever actually having to rule. That was ruined when his cousin Rudolf was found dead with his mistress in a hunting lodge. After he became the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, he rose through the ranks, eventually coming into control of the army. It was for this position that he and his wife Sophie were in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, visiting the provinces. The visit was problematic. The Kingdom of Serbia, next door, was trying its hardest to annex Bosnia, and the Bosnians wanted to be annexed by Serbia. And the date, June 28th, was a problem because it was an anniversary of a Bosnian defeat by the Ottomans that left them provinces of a foreign conqueror. So it seemed like it was just a nasty, petty reminder of their inferior status. So when a Serbian nationalist group named the Black Hand had organized a terrorist plot to kill the Archduke and his wife, it shouldn't really surprise us. Political assassinations and anti-monarchy riots had been taking place and were fairly common. Anarchists, the unstable, and terrorists were often trying to assassinate rulers. Empress Sisi, we talked about on the last slide, had already been assassinated, for crying out loud. So one of the members of the Black Hand, a man named Gavrilo Princip, managed to shoot Franz Ferdinand and Sophie after a botched car bomb doesn't actually work. The Archduke and his wife die before they reach the hospital, and we are officially on the road to war. After the assassination of their heir, Austria-Hungary angrily delivers an ultimatum to Serbia for the role that Serbian terrorists played in the death. Austria-Hungary has been basically guaranteed a blank check of support from Germany, and so they bring in the big guns, thinking they can demand whatever they want because they have the army of Germany to support them. The ultimatum that they give to the Serbians is absolutely astounding. It was deliberately provocative, and there was no way Serbia could accept all of the terms on the list. Austria-Hungary knew this, that they were hoping to cause a war that would leave them in a position to capitalize on Serbian territory and put them, the Serbians, back in their place. After a month of failed negotiations where all the European powers were trying to solve the crisis, and Serbia agreed to all of the conditions but two, which were ridiculous and would have forced them to change their constitution, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. Germany, who had guaranteed Austria a blank check of support, saw this moment as its ticket to great power status. It would circumvent Russia's protection of Serbia and subordinate Austria-Hungary's needs to its own political game. Germany declares war on Serbia, but also on France and Russia, who have nothing to do with the assassination of the Archduke. In the meantime, telegrams are furiously going back and forth between Berlin and St. Petersburg. It turns out that the Kaiser and Tsar Nicholas are cousins, so that's super awkward, but neither of them can give in to their mutual affection for each other and surrender. So the process called mobilization continues, with both men trying to stop it but not trying hard enough. And Russian troops are mustered and supplies start being sent towards the borders. While waiting on Russian mobilization, Germany attacks France as they'd planned to, using the Schlieffen Plan, and forces Austria-Hungary to abandon their fight with Serbia so that they can do the same. The Schlieffen Plan calls for the quickest route into France to complete that fight quickly before the Russians are ready, so that the army can turn around, go back through Germany, and hit the Russian border. The quickest, least mountainous way to go from Germany into France is through poor Belgium. Belgium is new. We've talked about this before. This is why Leopold was so gung-ho in the Congo. He's trying to prove that young Belgium was important. Because they were so new, Great Britain has secretly promised them protection. So when Germany marches through Belgium and demands their surrender, and they valiantly say no, Britain is forced to come to their aid and declare war on Germany. Now the entire Triple Entente is at war with Germany. When Germany declares war on Britain, in return, Japan is forced to enter the war on the side of the British and the French, with whom they have agreements, bringing the East into the war as well. So what started as a regional scuffle over the assassination of an actually unpopular third heir has now officially become a world war. When you add in all the colonies, protectorates, and spheres of influence, it's easy to see why. We're going to get more into how World War I was conducted and how that was new and also amazingly tragic in the next episode. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe so that way you don't miss any AP World History content.